Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to this online AM language lesson. In this lesson, we're going to look at a range of different aspects to do with IELTS, with the idea to develop your skills. In relation to IELTS, we have one person already. Good afternoon. Let me know who you are, and let me know if you have any specific questions as well. I'll be happy to take your questions during this session. Maybe you have specific questions you would like answering. If you, perhaps you would like specific questions answered or answering. Right. So let's share the video, and we can start. Share WhatsApp, and there we go. Okay. So hopefully more people will start to join. So with the IELTS lesson, there's a few things we can look at. I don't want to repeat any of the things that I've already spoken about. So let's see if we can find something specific for you guys that's going to really help you develop your skills. I think one of the things we can do is perhaps look at, well, tomorrow afternoon we're going to look a little bit more at writing. I think one of the things that we can look here is, now it's a little bit difficult to look at the reading in the correct way because I can't share. I need to find out. I know there's a system that you can use during live lessons where you can share things, but I don't know that yet. So I'm going to have to see if I can find the best way to approach this. I think what I'll do is I'm going to take you through a book, and I'm going to take you through how you can develop your skills, your IELTS skills in your own time, and the way you can do that. So during this, please ask me questions so I can help. You. I'm looking at new insight into IELTS, the Cambridge edition. If you do have this book, please open it. It will help you. So let's just start off. Now, something that we haven't been able to do, and it's a little bit difficult for me to do because I can't play your recording, but it is to do with listening. Now, this is something that it's a little bit difficult to do without a recording, but when we are trying to develop our listening techniques, there's a number of things that we need to consider. So let's start off by looking at a particular task that could come up during the listening and what you can do to help you yourself develop and improve your listening skills. So one type of listening you could get is trying to follow a description when it comes to diagrams, maps, and plans. I just need to swallow. No, I don't have any water with me. Never mind. I'll have to wait. One of the things that you first need to do when you end up going into your listening test, and if you have a diagram, map, or plans, the first thing you need to do, following. First, look at the map and look at or the diagram and look how it's laid out. What markers are there in the map? Sorry, what markers are there on the map? So, for instance, if you have your new Insight IELTS open, page 18 and 19, if we look at page 19, for example, you've got your you have your map. We can see areas labeled A, B, C, D, E, F, H, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Sorry. You've got north, south, west, east in the top left-hand corner, and you've got some planes as well. And you've got a walkway, you've got a bus stop. So the first thing you need to do is familiarize yourself with the map that you're looking at. Now, when I use the term familiarize, it means when you familiarize yourself with something, it means you look at it and you try to understand what you're looking at before you've attempted to answer a question. Now, this term familiarize, to familiarize yourself, I'll write this down here as well. It's something you need to do when it comes to the writing as well. It's an important aspect of your exam strategy. So first things first, familiarize yourself with the paper, questions, language. Familiarize. That's the idea. And remember that familiarize, or to familiarize yourself, is when you look at the paper and you try to find the most important information you can without starting the paper. Okay, by that I mean you're in the exam, you've got the paper has the exam has started, but before you start the question, or before you start answering the question, you take time to look at the questions, you look at the material of the questions. This is what you do in the reading and the listening and writing part one as well, task one. So you can then be in a better position to actually answer the question. Now, with diagrams or maps or drawings, for instance, you need to look at it, like I've said, and automatically see, right, what are the most important points. Now, with a map, for example, or with a map, what you need to quickly look at is something called landmarks. Your landmarks on the map. Roads, for example, any buildings identified, any locations such as bus stops, or area E, area D, area A, for example. Then you've got north, south, east, west, because when you start listening to someone talking about a map, they might start off in one area, and the way they describe, you're not going to hear them say, for instance, you're going to walk from E to B by going up the road, then right, and then left, and then right, and then left, and then right. You're probably not going to hear anything nearly that simple. You're going to hear them mention certain landmarks, such as, for instance, when you arrive from the city, you need to take the first right, and you need to go to the hangar, which is your first right as well. So you need to go right and then right again. It's going to be a little bit vague. So that's why you need to really listen to the recordings carefully. You need to look for things like car park, domestic terminal, for example, lifts, regional terminal. Those are the sort of things that you're looking for. You might then have a blank filler. Now, a blank filler is when you have a bit of text and you will need to fill in, you need to complete the question, the sentences with no more than 3 words, for example, or a number. Now, for this, what you need to do is you need to read the text very carefully and automatically see what type of word needs to go there. So, for instance, we have this example here on page 19. You need to travel by. You need to travel by. Okay, and get off after. get off after at the People's Square and walk along Nanjing Road East. Automatically, I don't even need, you shouldn't even need to listen to the text to know what type of language they're looking for. If you're using travel by, what's the most likely thing? In the context, get off after something. Well, automatically, we're probably thinking of a bus. So before we've even listened, we can assume that the most likely answer here is a bus. You need to travel by bus. You need to get after something, a particular stop at the People's Square. So by reading the question beforehand and looking at the blanks, you can then automatically start to see, right, what type of word should I be looking for? Travel by, some type of transport. What's the most likely thing? There's a bus stop on the map over there, so I'm guessing it's probably going to be bus. Okay. And then as you continue reading through, you can continue to try and predict what language you'd be looking for. And that is listening out for. And that's a really important thing. The importance of trying to predict the language that you are going to hear. This is one of the most important skills to develop in the listening of the exam. And when you're listening, when you're predicting, you need to think of the paraphrasing language or the paraphrasing terminology that they might use. So if you've got road, maybe it might not be just any old road. It might be a street. It might be a pathway. It might be a side road. Need to, if it's, let's go with something slightly different. Let's say you're looking at different type of buildings. Again, if you're talking about maybe they describe the place that you're going to. So let's say you've got a dance center, and the answer eventually is going to be dance center. They might not say you need to go to dance center, the dance center. They might say you need to go to your lesson later, where you're going to try and do some choreography, for example, because there's a performance coming up at the end of the month. You need to be listening out for that type of language sometimes during the listening, because then they don't always say, they might not always say school. They might use a different word, or they might try and describe the place. So these are the things that you need to listen out for during the listening practice. During the listening. I should remind you guys, in case you don't already know, at the start of 2020, in the listening paper, they changed just an aspect of the listening. What they did is you no longer hear a practice run. They go straight into it. So you won't have someone saying, you are now going to hear a recording on X, Y, Z, and you answer like this. No, there's no example. You go straight into it. The other thing is, now if you turn to page 25, you've got something called page 25, still listening. You've got something called seeing beyond the surface meaning. Now this is when you're trying to listen beyond the simple here. So this is how this is important from how the language is used, and the sub meaning actually of what someone is saying, the sub meaning or the inferred meaning. So if we have a little look at the example here, it says like read the statement below and then practice stressing different words to produce different meanings. The first one has been done as an example. So one hand you see, I thought the assignment was due on Thursday. Then it has another example. I thought the assignment was due on Thursday. When listening, the word that is stressed might change the answer to what you need to listen out for. It's a bit like if you heard, would you recommend this dictionary to an elementary student? Would you recommend this dictionary to an elementary student? Would you recommend this dictionary to an elementary student? Would you recommend this dictionary to an elementary student? You are always going to stress the part of the language that you think has the most meaning, the part of the language you want them to explain to you. And this is no difference in the IELTS exam. So when you read the question, and you might have a question which is to do with sub-meaning, not the actual so the sub-meaning is based on the intonation of the voice, what is important to the speaker, for example. So that's something else that you need to try and listen out for. What words are stressed, and how could the sentence be changed? How could the meaning of the sentence be changed as well? It could be between a dialogue between 2 or 3 people, for example, as because there's 4 parts to the listening, and it's sometimes there's parts of the listening where you're going to end up with listening to maybe three speakers, and that could really have a big impact as well. Now, I've spoken for 15 minutes now on listening, so I'm now going to move on to one last thing to do with listening, and then I'm going to take it and move on to another aspect of your 4 skills. So in the end, we should divide the time roughly 15 minutes for each skill. But the last thing I just want to point out is, and this is to do on page 29, this is to do with signpost words. Signpost words is how we link our ideas together. Now, this ties in with writing. This also ties in with speaking and reading. So although you end up looking at it in the listening, because it helps you follow a speaker, you can use it too when trying to follow a reading, when you're trying to speak and you're trying to make someone, you're trying to help that person follow you and what you're trying to say. And it's also the same when you are writing. Signpost language is really important. Now, signpost words are words like because, even if, although, as well as, unlike, whereas, for example. You've got signposts that we can use to link 2 sentences together, like on one hand, but on the other. In addition, for instance, by contrast. So this is the type of language that you just need to familiarize yourself with. If you, sorry, one second. If you have any questions about some of this, some of the signpost language, like you're not too sure what the words mean, such as whereas, while, despite, please ask me in the live chat, and I will stop to explain how we use these words and why we use these words, as well as an example. So that takes me through to the listening. Let's move on now to looking at some things you guys can do in your spare time to help you develop your reading. Now, something I have mentioned before during the live YouTube videos, it's the importance of developing your skills when it comes to scanning for specific detail and skimming for general understanding. So the question comes, and you have the text. The biggest mistake you can make is if you just start reading the text. Please do not do that. You will waste valuable time. Instead, first thing you need to do, make sure you read the question. Now, this doesn't just go for the IELTS exam. This goes for any exam, even our own level tests. Please take time to read the questions first. When reading the questions, this is where you have to really circle your key words in your question in order to know and identify what the question is asking you. You can then go through, and if you like, you can skim the text to understand generally, okay? If you skim through, it means you're not reading everything word for detail, but what you can do is you can skim read the paragraph and just make a note of what the general theme of the paragraph is about. Is it most likely us answering questions 1, 2, and 3? Is it talking about the main heading? Is it talking about an idea that is related? Does it just introduce the main person that the article is talking about? Does it introduce the subject itself? Does it explain the subject? The purpose of skimming paragraph by paragraph is so you can make a note what the paragraph is talking about. Once you know what the paragraph is talking about, and on the side you can note to yourself, okay, you can read paragraph 1 and you can say, right, paragraph 1, it probably answers question 1, 2, and 3. Paragraph 2, it probably answers question 4, 5, and paragraph 3 answers questions 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so you now know where you need to look when you need to scan to find your answer. So you go back to the question, you read the question again, and you think, right, I know I now need, in order to answer question 1, I need to look at paragraph 1. And that's when you scan. Scanning is when you just look specifically for the word or words that are going to give you that tells you where you need to look to find your answer that is directly related to the question. So that is the technique, and that is why it's so important to do so. Now, the other thing that is really important is your ability. If you look at page 48, something that you definitely should look at in your new Insight to IELTS book, it's identifying main and supporting ideas. This is when you need to be able to read and separate the main ideas of an article and the supporting ideas of an article. Now, what I mean is the writer giving his opinion, for example, or is he talking about a general opinion? Is the writer giving any facts or discussing different ideas? Or is he talking about his own idea, for example? What's the main theme and what's the sub-theme? Here we can look at certain language. Like, for instance, if someone says, the truth is, blame can also be a powerful constructive force, for example. Like the phrase, the truth is, indeed, as it has been said, for example. The stronger the language, the more it tells us about whether the language is identifying a main point or maybe a personal opinion. So that's something really important to do, and I encourage all of you read unit chapter 3 of the reading, page 48. Make sure you can identify main and supporting ideas. Okay, moving on. What about summarizing when it comes to reading? Well, the trick is here is that if you can summarize a passage or a section, or this shows that you can then, this shows the examiner that you have understood the content. And therefore you can paraphrase it, and you can paraphrase it in your own words. So summarizing is a key reading skill, specifically in the academic studies as well. In the IELTS summary section, you can test your understanding of the whole text, for example, or your understanding of the detail. And this goes back to something I was talking about before, to help you navigate through this. This is where gist and scan reading come into it, because it helps you and allows you to be able to summarize different parts of the passage and text to help you understand what the text is talking about and the paraphrasing language that is being used. Okay, so that is quite a bit that's a fair amount of things that we've already spoken about when it comes to reading. Another thing as well that you can do is still predict what your answers are most likely to be in the when it comes to reading. You can predict it again in a similar way to how you would predict with the listening. You read the questions, you think about what the question is asking you, um, and you quickly put together the type of language that you need to be looking for in order to give an accurate answer. Okay, so that takes us to the end of just the reading. At this point, do any of you have any questions? Is there anything you would like me to specifically go into? Um, just let me know in the comments section, in the live chat section. Just as a reminder, guys, for those of you doing the um, IELTS this year, due to the coronavirus outbreak, please get in contact with the center that you intend to use, that you intend to go to do your IELTS exam. Find out from them what they are doing during this period when providing options to do the IELTS exam. Is there the option to delay if you've already booked? And also find out from your universities, if you're going on to do a master's, for example, find out if um, the universities are doing anything in relation to um, maybe offering certain packages for people who have been affected by the coronavirus, so they can't do that IELTS paper. So please find that out. We've now gone we're halfway through the lesson here, and we now can move on to writing. The first part, what I want to talk about is, let's just talk about the first part of the IELTS writing. Okay, this is interpreting charts, tables, graphs, and diagrams. This is page 94 of the New Insight IELTS. Here, the important thing is the type of language we use to talk about what we can see, not what we think we can say. So this is where we have to make some general observations, like for instance, the most popular music in the 70s, the second most, the third, the least, the majority of, a large number of, most, very few, hardly any. You can, of course, use accurate language in terms of like the actual percentages, but in order to help build up your language a little bit, use this terminology of this comparative terminology. And that's a really important thing. If you've got something like a chart, make sure you're using comparative language when you're comparing the bar chart or the pie chart, for example. Um, the other thing as well is you don't need to overcomplicate your language either in the IELTS task one. It's very rare that you need to end up using very complicated language in task one, because we're trying to write exactly what we can see. So unless if it's a unique specific type of image, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. One of the things that can be really quite difficult actually is explaining a diagram. Explaining a diagram can be quite difficult, and the best way to approach trying to talk about a diagram is, first of all, you need to find the starting point, because a diagram in task one of the academic writing is always going to try and explain a process. So before you start, you need to make sure you know where to start with the process. From there, you're then trying to explain a process. So what's first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and how the cycle that they're showing works. You need to make a decision early on, as well as the context. Now, often when you are talking about a diagram, it's usually going to be in the present. We are usually going to have to use some form of the present because we are explaining the process. So, for example, on page 98, you could say there's a little diagram of carbon dioxide, there's the sea, and there are some fossil fuels power stations. So you can say, like, the diagram shows how carbon dioxide affects the world's oceans, or is recycled through the world's oceans, for example. So we need to think of our language very carefully. Always start off in writing task 1, explaining what the diagram shows. Is it showing the process of CO2? Is it showing how a building is heated? Now, you can say, now we don't go in for an introduction, body, and conclusion, but your opening sentence needs to state what the diagram what the diagram shows, really. Now, let's have a little look at one aspect, okay, and that is something that might come up in task 1, and that's writing about trends, for example. In case you don't know what a trend is what is popular in the marketplace, and is the trend on the rise. Now, I know we've had lessons with the term rise and fall, for example. So just to remind you, that's what we're talking about when we're discussing a trend. Sorry. Is there a trend? Is the trend popular? Is something on the rise? Is something on the decline? This is the sort of thing we need to look at when we're talking about a trend. And it can be a little bit difficult to explain properly. So we need to make sure we've got our terminology down to a T. Now, if you do have a new insight to IELTS, if you look at page 100, it's got a really good column. Well, actually, when I say column, a really good table to try and explain to you some of the language that we can use when we're talking about trends, for example. So we've got nouns, we've got verbs, we've got phrases. So if you're watching, let me know if you have new insight to IELTS. Can you let me know in the live chat section? Do you have this book? Are you looking at the same page as I am? Page 100. Page 100. Okay. So if we have a little look, the first things first, we've got nouns. So you've got a rise, you've got an increase, you have a surge, and you have growth. Okay, so if you've got a rise is obviously when the market is going up, same with an increase. You've got a surge, which is not just something that's gradual, but a surge is a jump. It really goes up. And then you've got growth. Growth can be talking about anything from a surge to something that gently rises. You then got verbs such as to rise, to increase, to surge, and to grow as well. So you will notice that we've got 4 words that can be used as a noun and that can also be used as a phrase as well. Now, to add extra emphasis to our nouns, for example, we can use adjectives such as sharply rise, like sharply rise, dramatically increases, significantly rises, for example. This is when we're showing that there's something really big. There's a big difference here. And how these terms are linked to words like a fall, a drop, a decline, a dip. So, for instance, we've got a rise and a fall. we've got increase and a drop. We've got surge and a decline, which is just going down, and then a dip. You've got a dip in the market. Dip. This is when the market goes down. Dip. So again, this language is going to be really important for you to know and use, and to be used accurately during the writing task 1 of the academic paper. Okay. I'm not going to touch on writing part 2. I think I dedicated a whole lesson to writing part 2 last time. And I will continue probably to look at some more stuff to do with writing part 2, but tomorrow, more to do with tomorrow. Okay, so that is now taking us to 35 minutes. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know. Please let me know. So let's have a little look at now the speaking, and this will take us into the final part of the lesson. When we are in part 1, it's really important that part 1 is always going to be a more it's meant to be take on the idea of an informal conversation where the interlocutor asks you a series of questions as if they're kind of like get to know you questions a little bit. It'll be about your childhood, maybe about maybe your hometown, for example. And it's important for you to approach this. There's preparing, and then there's over preparing. Now, what I mean by over preparing is, in this context, is when you're when you tell yourself beforehand that you are going to be asked certain questions, so you spend time just practicing those questions, and you end up over preparing for those questions, and you figured about other questions you could be asked. You could be asked anything on different topics, so don't practice at home answering the same questions on the same topic. That will not help you. You need to try and have a wide look, okay, a broad look towards the possible questions you might be asked. In part, whether it's part 1 or part 2, fluency is really important. Granted, okay, accuracy is important as well in terms of using the right structures and everything, but fluency, the more fluent you are, the better your mark will be in terms of trying to communicate your ideas. Part of what helps us to understand someone is the flow of their speech. If they are taking too long, if they can't get the words out, that's going to affect their ability to show the interlocutor what they are trying to say, what they know. I mean, you could be asked questions about your family, for example, like how many siblings do you have? This is where you need to be prepared for the synonyms, like siblings. Okay, so what are your siblings like? Well, okay, I have a brother and I have a sister, for example. So yes, be prepared in a broad sense, but don't spend too much time just researching into how to answer one specific or one or two specific questions, because then they might not come up and then you'll be in trouble. Part 2, I remember last week looking at part 2 and how to prepare your answer and the things you can do. It's very useful. Now, giving your talk. If you remember, when part 3, giving your talk. Sorry. Where was I? Yeah, part 2, giving your talk. Just remember, you would have had a minute to prepare. Now, I spoke about what you can do to prepare yourself properly for part 2, but this is where using signpost language in part 2, part 3 really, really becomes important. So if you can learn that signpost words, that will help you in this part as well. Make sure you answer your question, the questions that are specific to the question, and that your notes are not too complicated for you to follow, let alone the interlocutor. Like I said, if you have any questions, please let me know. Please let me know. Then we have speaking, understanding abstract and analytical questions. Abstract, by the way, is it's not something. When we talk about abstract ideas, these are not physically, but this is not physical ideas of certain things. These are ideas like if you talk about abstract ideas, these are largely sometimes psychological. It can be a question of happiness. I mean, happiness is an abstract. Is something abstract. When you're talking about your emotional and mental relationship with happiness, this can be the same with, let's say, well, anxiety, for example. So we need to be we need to make sure that when we that you always try to answer the question. It's easy to go off a tangent and start talking about something that's not completely related. So definitely have really listen carefully. It's useful to listen to people doing the exam or doing a trial exam of the speaking. It can give you really good, it can show you some really good ideas that you can take into the exam that will help you score a better mark. So I'm just going to have a little look to see what we can take some time to look at, and then we can go from there. One moment. Okay, I can see someone writing over here, but you've written in Arabic, so I'm afraid I can't, I don't know what you've written, so I'm not going to be able to answer your question if you have written a question. If you can, please please try and write in English. It'll be easier for me to answer your question. So, first of all, let's have a little look. Ways that you can respond to questions. Obviously, when trying to give an explanation, you can use words like firstly, one reason is, that's why, consequently, which is the same as result, or for example. There you can see on page 157, new insight to IELTS. That's particularly helpful. Making a suggestion. This is where you probably be looking to use the word should. For example, I think we should, or would. It would be a good idea. It would be a good idea if. What about? One idea would be. That's quite a good one when you don't want to give just your personal opinion, but you want to give opinions on the topic that you know are generally held. Like if it's on the subject of climate change, you could say, one idea would be to stop flying for a month, for example. That's how you can suggest an idea. Comparing two things, this is really important and something that they would probably listen out for. Here you've got the opportunity to use words like, or phrases like, I prefer, my favorite, I think something is preferable to. If you compare with, so if you compare person A with person B, for example. So there's a lot of useful language on page 156 and 157. I suggest you have a look. Please let me know in the comment section. If you want to try something, write in the comment section. I will have a look and I will let you know. Okay. So that is one. So there we have some brief ideas regarding of how to go through the IELTS book, New Insight to IELTS, and we can try and address one or two things. I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask any questions you might have. Now, there's only one person here watching at the moment as we speak. So I'm going to give you the option to ask me any questions. I can leave up to 15 minutes for this. However, if you don't have any questions, and as you're just one person, I won't do the full hour. I'll cut it short in about 5 minutes. Usually, it's always a little bit better if there's some more people watching. That's why. So let me know if you have any questions. I'll wait for you to ask me. So yes, I would cut the video short by 5 minutes, as it's just one person. I'll give you a minute to think of any questions in case you have any questions for me on the subject of IELTS, or if you just have a question in general about learning English, what you can do during this period while you're in self-isolation during this lockdown period because of the coronavirus. I'll be happy to give you some ideas. Okay, fair enough. Well then, thank you very much for watching. If you do have any questions and you would like to think about those questions, just leave it in the comment section. Tomorrow afternoon, there will be a session for upper intermediate, advanced, and IELTS students as well. But in this session, I'm going to be looking specifically at developing your writing skills. We'll look at signpost words. We'll look at discourse markers, which are kind of the same thing, really, and how to structure your sentences, as well as we're going to have a really good look as well at some grammar as well. So we'll be looking at all of that tomorrow. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining. I hope you have a good afternoon and a good day, and take care. And I will, if you like, you can join me tomorrow in the afternoon. Just to let you know what the times are for tomorrow, should you wish to join. Let me just see. Okay. Okay, so tomorrow, in the morning at 10 o'clock in the morning, this is where you have the beginner and elementary session. At 2 o'clock, you'll have the pre-intermediate and intermediate session. And at 4 o'clock, at this time, this is when you'll have the upper intermediate and advanced / IELTS lesson as well. So if you'd like to join me for 4 o'clock tomorrow, you are welcome to do. Thank you very much. Like and share the video, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a good afternoon and take care. Bye for now.